Hello, Chameleon Wranglers. This is Bill Strand. Welcome to the Chameleon Academy YouTube channel. This last week, we've been going over using bioactive environments for chameleons. Since we chameleon keepers have traditionally used the upper part of the cage and left the bottom part of the cage clear, this is a new experience for many of us. But considering how much success keepers and breeders have had with some rare and hard to breed species, it's a skill we need to learn. And the best way to do that is to have a build guide which leads you step by step. And so I'm working on producing that build guide on the ChameleonAcademy.com website. And to get a great start, I have this interview with Michael Nash, who has worked extensively with chameleons in bioactive environments and has had success with the carpet chameleons, jeweled chameleons, Elliot's chameleon. He's coming on, and then both he and I are creating bioactive environments and giving you the shopping list so you can do it alongside us. You can take the concepts and use the equipment that you have, or else you can take the shopping list and get the exact equipment that we're using, and you can do it alongside us. The shopping list and build guide is on ChameleonAcademy.com/bioactive, and it's linked down in the description. But before you go there, please listen to this interview where Michael and I talk about each one of the components that we're going to use in this build guide. So please join me in welcoming Michael Nash to the Chameleon Academy YouTube channel. Hello, Chameleon Wranglers. I am here with Michael Nash, and we are going to be doing a build together. Michael, thank you for coming back on.
Hey, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure. Looking forward to discussing all this.
Absolutely, because we are having a lot of fun with bioactive setups, and I know you've done a lot, and that's why we're having you on. I've experimented with it behind me. I've loved it, and you have done so much to use bioactive and push it forward with some species that have been very difficult to breed. You've been incredibly successful, and so we want to dive into one of your builds. Michael, let's just start off with what benefits are you seeing to raising baby chameleons and smaller chameleons in a bioactive environment?
So, as you alluded to, I think some of the benefits I've been seeing are simply the continued survival, for one thing, of species that have traditionally not lasted very long in captivity. So I see improved survival of both the adults and the babies. And in addition to that, I find the maintenance more enjoyable. And then finally, I think it overall allows for a more enriching experience for both the baby chameleons as well as myself. So, better longevity, easier to keep them, maintenance I enjoy more. There's a number of reasons that I've really pivoted towards doing bioactive for these guys.
We have a general feel. We know the results. They're successful, and we have a general feel as to why it would be better. But do you have anything that you can put your finger on as to what benefit this is providing beyond the standard care cage that we've set up that has made this successful?
Yeah, what I would say is that it allows for more opportunities for the animals to regulate where they want to be. And I think of particular concern for chameleons is hydration and rather dehydration. So I think the bioactive setups offer somewhat of a buffer for dehydration if set up correctly. In addition to that, it allows them to utilize more of the enclosure so that they're able to get where they want to be and therefore maybe extend their life or maybe just avoid excess elements that they're trying to not be a part of, like more UV or heat. So I think it basically gives them more power to go where they want to be able to utilize the enclosure better. And particularly relevant, as I said, is hydration, which I think is quite improved with bioactive setups for babies.
Now, how much have you done with bioactive in, say, larger species of chameleons, panthers, veils, jacksons, that size?
I've done it with a few enclosures of that size, and I've done it with things like Elliot's chameleons. I've tried it a little bit with some of the bigger species, but The reason I haven't done it as much is because it's just kind of it's a heavier enclosure, right? So I've been able to get by without it for the big species. In addition to that, I'm okay with not doing it for the big species because I feel that offering them hydration is actually a little bit easier than for little tiny things an inch long, where if they go up on the screen too long, they just die. So for big, more potentially resilient chameleons, I think it's not quite as necessary, although I've tried it. That's not my go-to for big species because the enclosure just tends to weigh more and be a bit more unwieldy. So,
I found with the baby chameleons that I'm raising, I prefer to use fogging to and natural humidity within the soil to keep them from dehydrating, rather than continually misting to have them rehydrate when they dehydrate. So if we stop the dehydration, I like it better to maintain their hydration, and that's what Bioactive does.
Precisely.
So, all right, so let's dive into one specific build. And so everybody watching and listening, what we're going to do is we're going to look at one specific build that Michael's doing, and I've been doing it too, so we can talk back and forth about the characteristics of the products that we're using. And so this doesn't mean that you can't do Bioactive with all sorts of other products on the market, but we're gonna focus in so it's a lot easier to grasp, and we'll talk about specific situations. And for today, we're going to be talking about the new leap cages, and so you see those in the background here, and Michael's been working with those cages. And so, Michael, which of the leap cages do you use, and why?
It's the smaller sized one. I forget the exact dimensions. I think it's like 24 inches by 17, something.
Your is a 22 by 17 by 18, I believe.
That's it. Yes. Yeah. I tend to enjoy that one. For my needs, especially working with smaller species and babies, I think that's a wonderful size. I mean, there's others available, but that's the one I have more experience with.
Yeah, and the one I'm using is the 22 by 17 by 24. Mm-hmm. So, well, let's talk about the differences within that 6-inch height difference. Do you think that makes a difference?
I think if you set up the enclosure designed to capitalize on that difference, then it can be valuable, right? But for my purposes, I'm trying to avoid allowing the chameleons to get up to the top anyway, because I'm working with kind of sensitive species where it's to my advantage to keep them away from harsh elements of the enclosure, like the UV or heat, unless, within reason, of course, no MPD or anything. So the extra height can certainly be useful, but more of what I'm concerned about is blocking their access to that top point anyway. So for that reason, I don't use the extra height very much, but it certainly could be useful. Just for this particular purpose, I don't particularly need it.
Okay, so if somebody is trying to make a decision between whether they get the 18-inch high or the 24-inch high, what would you advise to them in making that decision?
Yeah, so I would say that in general, bigger is better, and the reason for that is, there's many reasons proposed for that, but in my mind, the biggest reason for getting bigger when possible is so you have more opportunities to modify the environment in such a way where the chameleon can utilize it. That's what I've been saying with the bioactive thing just a minute ago. Any way you can maximize the usability of the enclosure and offer different microclimates and different spots for the animals to be and get away from this and access this and so on, that's to your advantage and that's to the animal's advantage. So bigger is better as long as you choose to use that space effectively, right? Because having 6 extra inches with nothing in it and no useful space there, that's like having an aquarium that's 10 feet tall but only a foot of water. I mean, yeah, there's space, but if it's not usable to the animal, who cares? right? So it's all about planning the enclosure and utilizing what's inside to the best of your abilities. And that varies depending if it's a chameleon or, an anole or whatever else, because each animal you put in there might have a different thing it uses in the enclosure, right? So it also depends on what you're putting in there, of course.
Yeah, and on my side, I'll say you got to have to make a decision based on what kind of plants you put in there, because some plants stay smaller and some plants grow larger, and the higher the cage is, the less light is going to get down to the bottom. Now, between 18 inches and 24 inches, that's not necessarily something that you got to worry about. But when you start going up to like 36 inches, well, now you're starting to put a lot of distance between your light and the bottom of the cage, and so you're going to have to be more careful of how much light gets down there, and it'd be very easy for just one plant to start blocking off the light from everything getting down to the bottom. So for me, I'd say be careful how you set up that cage and use that space with realizing the difficulty of light getting all the way down there. But of course, the larger the cage is, the longer you're going to be able to keep a growing baby chameleon in there if it's going to be a larger species. Of course, if it's a carpet chameleon or something around that size, you're good to go. So,
excellent points. Totally agree.
So yeah, I've enjoyed using a 24-inch. That has worked well for me with my my baby Cristatus, although the largest of those babies is very soon going to grow out of my 24-inch tall cage, and so I think it's going to have to go into the 36-inch soon. But they've grown very well in the bioactive environment. So with the Leap cage, let's talk about your experiences. You've been working with them for many months now, and it's a very new design, very new to the industry. There's really been nothing like it. So let's talk about the construction of the Leap cage and the characteristics, how you've used them, and how do you like it?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. So, for some important background about it, for a number of years, I would use traditional screen enclosures, and I'd simply modify them with coroplast, which is this kind of plastic cover, essentially. And that worked very well for me because I would also convert the bottom of these screen enclosures into a bioactive floor, right? So I'd sort of jerry-rig my own bioactive setups using the available, tools, right? And Leap has been really nice because their design is pretty much exactly what I was trying to emulate with that previous approach, because it's lightweight, which I enjoy about the screen enclosures, but also it maintains humidity with those nice sides, right? So, even though Leap is relatively new on the market compared to some of the old, screen enclosures, I've been using a design somewhat similar to it for a number of years, and that's been very successful for me. So what I like about it is that it's lightweight. It fills all the needs I'm interested in, which means a nice front ventilation, top ventilation without excessive loss of humidity. Also has a nice spot to put the mister, which I enjoy. It's really, I love the lightweight aspect of it, and I may be harping on that a bit. And it's not like everyone is always moving their enclosures around, but I kind of am because I have so many. I'm always trying to shuffle things and make it more ergonomic and so on. So that has actually been a really nice benefit for me.
Yeah, one thing about these Leap cages, and if you hear us talking about the name Tim or Tim Marks, he's the one who designed these cages for Leap. He's part of Leap. And the advantage that he had is he's been in the chameleon community for who knows how long, and he has used all of the cages up until this point. So he's had years and years to figure out what's really important about all of these different cages, and he's been able to optimize those. And so he looked at these, he's saying, okay, it's important, these things are important, these things aren't so important. And so you have an application that is highly optimized. And so he looked at the the rack system that originally, like through Dragon Strand, created these the rack system with the nursery cages and all that. Well, he looked at that and he said, okay, within this structure of the rack system, you don't need that very strong frame that holds up the cage, because you have the ability to put your lights up on the rack. And so he's been able to optimize that cage for that application. And this is, I mean, of course, so everybody knows I'm the one who created the Dragon Strand cages, and those cages are pretty solid. I mean, I had one fall out of a van as I was driving, and yeah, I picked it up off of the street and I used it again. But we don't need that kind of strength in the cage for something that's just sitting around in a rack, nice and protected rack. And so he's been able to optimize it and make what we've got here. So that's why you see very subtle, I'll put up some graphics, but you've got some subtle ventilation holes there, and it's all optimized to work for this application. And so that's why these are very perfect for what we're using. And I just went off on a monologue, didn't I?
Well, you covered a lot that I should have mentioned. So I'd like to double down on a couple of your points where, a struggle with bioactive chameleon keeping in particular has been finding a way to keep the substrate in, right? Because if it's a screen enclosure, they sell some kits and I have my own approach I used to use with fabric and stuff, but there's never been like a clear, you just do this and it's fixed. And now there is, because of that nice substrate tray. And what's nice about that is also that the ventilation, as you alluded to, is right in the perfect spot. It goes right over the substrate. So you don't need to worry about optimizing that, because it's already set up, because it's made by reptile keepers. So I totally agree. It's really nice for that reason.
Okay, so let's talk about, once you've set it up, how you enjoy. First of all, let's go ahead and explain a little bit. I'll let you talk here and explain a little bit about how the cage is set up and the materials it's using, because for anybody used to what we've had in the market, it's not intuitive. So try to explain how this cage is put together.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It relies on this material similar to coroplast, which I mentioned at the beginning. It's this very nice kind of plastic material. And it's sturdy enough where you're never going to have a problem with it with something like a chameleon. It's pretty solid. And the way this is designed, it's leveraging the best aspects of this plastic in there, because it comes kind of flat, and then you simply sort of crack it into place almost with this plastic stuff, and there's not much in the way of screwing things in. It all just sort of clips together, which is really nice. So the frame, of course, is sort of a more traditional frame in that it's kind of metal and it has the typical stuff, but the sides, which are so much of the enclosure, are this nice plastic. So that, I think, is a very smart move. And maybe if you put like a crocodile monitor in there, it might be able to get out. But for 99% of anything you'd ever want to keep in your house, I mean, it's remarkable how sturdy it is. So I think it's really leveraging this material as best as one can, and that offers a lot of benefits.
Yeah, and let's talk about the substrate tray, which is a surprise to most people about how it works. But I'll say from the beginning here, the substrate trays that we've had up until now, yeah, they're strong, but they don't need to be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's talk about the substrate tray.
Sure. I mean, I should say that basically, this is a smart design. It makes sense for our needs. And what I love about it is I don't need to, I like being creative, but it's just made to work for us, which is great, because lots of stuff on the market just doesn't. And you have to find some way to make, twist it and tailor it. And I know a few companies are now kind of moving towards this catering towards reptile keepers, but it's refreshing where it just works out of the package and there's not a whole lot to mess with. So as far as the substrate tray, basically plastic, and it's a tray, of course, but you sort of seal it into the bottom itself. And there's these little strips you put on there, and then you press on them, and it just sticks it. So what that does is, of course, it makes it so there's no gaps between this tray and the enclosure, which is something we've struggled with as a community in the past, right? Where dirt or bugs or whatever, water can kind of leak through. That's not the case here because it has this nice sort of rim to it that seals with the sides. It's deep enough to put whatever you need, and part of what's built in to the substrate tray are some little holes for the ventilation, and then in the front panel there's also a spot for that ventilation to go through all the way. So it comes with it. It's sort of built in. You just sort of put it, you just sort of move it up. I mean, it's hardly an assembly, and then you pin it in essentially.
Yeah, and for somebody who hasn't seen it before, it's essentially a piece of plastic that is flexible, and we call it the origami tray because you literally fold it together into a box, and then you attach it to the cage using double-sided sticky tape with some primer so it really sticks, and that's it. And so many people, when they see that for the first time, they say, that is so flimsy. Why in the world would we do that when we have these nice strong trays? And I got to say, the reason why we had those nice strong trays is because we couldn't figure out how to do it without that big thick plastic. It's not it. That is actually over engineering it. To hold soil, you don't need a PVC tray. And I know, because in my company, Dragon Strand, I used to have PVC trays because that's the way we could do it. But we didn't need all of that strength to make it work. So this is, once again, as you said, a smart way of doing it. It's optimized for our needs. This is all you need to hold in soil. And with the built-in ventilation, it works very well. And I'm focusing on this, and I'm harping on this because I just want to warn you, when you see it the first time, you're going to say, oh my goodness, how can this work? This is cheap. No, it's smart and it's optimized. It's not over-engineered. That's different. A lot of effort went into designing this so it works. And like Michael said, right out of the box, it works for our purpose. And so that's why these cages are very nice to work with. So, I'll say something that I enjoy is I like the hinge system. It's you got one long pin, and that works very well. As somebody who's designed small cages, creating a door that fits in nicely is a challenge, and so this is done quite nicely. So,
one thing I'll mention also, just to your point, is about how we don't need some brick wall to keep dirt in.
Yes.
Just for context, what I've used in the past is a piece of biodegradable corn fabric. Okay, at the bottom of my enclosures, a while ago, and I still have some like that. And that works great for years, and it's fabric. Like, it may as well be paper towels. So having plastic, I mean, that's perfect, right? So you have to really consider what force is actually being applied on this subject. And when you stack the tray, or really, even if it's not a tray, if it's fabric with dirt, it naturally kind of expands and pushes it against the side. So it fills the space just by having dirt in it anyway. So there's really no room for it to even be damaged by force, because it's not bearing any weight. So yeah, I agree. It's there's a lot of over engineering, and really we need something about that strong, or even fabric, to hold things in. So it works great for that purpose.
Now, one thing that I'm getting used to is the idea of no drainage. Now, I know people have been doing the dark frog community has been doing that all the time with the Ectoterra and the glass terrariums. And yes, I've done that with the clay balls, but with chameleons and soil floors, I've always had positive drainage. And that's one of the advantages I've had with those PVC substrate trays is I could always just drill holes and I have a drainage tray at the bottom. And so I never have a problem with saturated soil because I always have that drainage coming out. With the leap cages, it's a little bit harder to get that positive drainage unless you want to. I mean, it's easy to make holes in the bottom there, but let's talk a little bit from your perspective as to how you like the drainage situation with these cages.
Yeah, so but kind of the dogma with bioactive setups is you either add clay balls or you don't, or you have to build in some aspect of drainage. Like drainage is always important. You always want to think about drainage, but with the tools we have available now and with the things that we've learned over the years about how to keep these animals happy, I've simply found that we don't need to be, in many cases anyway, butting up against that edge of there's so much water leaking out. So with a fogger or with planning your misting at smart times so it sticks around longer, so there's more hydration opportunities, or adding more plants for humidity's sake, and all these other tools we now kind of understand, I found that the drainage is never an issue. And frankly, in some of the setups I have, I don't even have clay balls at the bottom, nor do I have external drainage. And that works great. So I've never had a problem with that that aspect of the enclosures because I never butt up against that there's too much water angle. So that's been my experience.
Well, it has been a growth opportunity for me, and as exciting as it is, sometimes it gets tiring having so many growth opportunities. But I guess that's what keeps us exciting. So I've done. I think this would. I've done the clay balls for all my dart frogs. That's standard. This is actually the first time that I have done something with chameleons where I don't have the positive drainage. And so, but I will say that I am enjoying, it's become much easier now that I've been incorporating fogging into my chameleon setups on a regular basis. And the reason is that the advantage of having the positive drainage is that you can mist as much as you want, and as long as you have good draining soil, you don't make a soggy mess. Now, I know a lot of people are going to start arguing with me on that, and for good reason, because you don't want to constantly be spraying down your setup. But with the positive drainage, I could spray as much as I wanted, as much as the chameleon wanted. But now that I do a lot more fogging in my system, I don't have to spray as much to keep the chameleon hydrated. And that's become a huge growth point in my husbandry over the last 3 years. It's been 3-4 years that I've been really working with fogging. And so I find that I don't have to mist as much to keep my chameleons hydrated when I use the fogging, so that I don't need as much drainage. And I in these guides that I'm putting together and that we're putting together, I have in there the clay balls for the drainage layer, and that's the official party line here. But the truth is, in these cages that I've got back up here behind me, they don't have the clay ball layer. They don't have that drainage layer. And they are not oversaturated with with liberal fogging. I haven't had a need to mist enough so the soil gets saturated. So it's learning that balance has been an exciting growth for me personally. I'm really enjoying this.
Something that might be of value to mention also is there's misting, and then there's misting for 10 minutes, and then there's a spritz of misting. So there's many different grades of misting as well. So one thing I kind of experimented with when I was trying to figure out how to keep these animals without the excessive water was thinking about, well, where is the water getting from this length of time of misting, and where is the nozzle pointing? So for instance, in some species, I'll mist more than a couple times a day, right? Just little small amounts, and it's always just to get the leaves wet, right? Mm-hmm. So I've modified that in some ways as well, so that the water is never actually seeing the substrate, right? It just goes on the leaves for a short time, so the chameleon can drink, and then that's it, right? It never goes down. So you can modify your misting as well, and maybe even position it so it's facing a plant more, or add more fans, right? There's lots. Misting doesn't have to just be it gets soaked or it doesn't. It can be another tool, right, for filling various different needs if we think about it correctly.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we have to realize in the chameleon community, especially those of us who have been around a little bit longer. We came from, I think just like 10 years ago, a decade ago, if you were keeping a chameleon a decade ago, our hydration approach was that you shower this chameleon until they cry uncle and they settle in, and then 10 minutes, 5 minutes into it, they start drinking. And we thought, okay, that's the way it should be. I know me on my podcast, I was saying, you spray until they settle in and then they start drinking. And you have to evolve from that mindset to realize maybe we don't have to shower a chameleon until they start drinking. We can keep them from dehydrating with the fogger, and then they just need the mister to just coat the surfaces so the chameleon can drink. And so those of us who have been around and have the we have experience, but we also have baggage from that experience, that we can start changing the way we look at hydration, and it works. So everybody, you get to enjoy growing as a herpetoculturist with me, and you can enjoy the discomfort and pain that comes along with the rebirth. Oh boy. So how much? So how do you monitor the water coming into your system and the hydration coming into your system to make sure it stays in balance?
Yeah. So, I have a lot of native plants in my yard, so they tend to thrive in the conditions I have here. And this is relevant, I promise. And the way I do it is to make sure that they're getting enough hydration, right? Is I just put my finger in the dirt like an inch or two. And if it's relatively wet, if it feels decent, not waterlogged, not bone dry, then that's about the level I want. And I approach the enclosure similarly. So you can simply just put your finger in there and then assess, well, how wet is this? If you feel like it's mud or slush, then that's a concern, right? And of course, that's sort of an initial sign that there's something kind of off. But if it goes on long enough, then you start noticing things like the plants get yellow or the plants start to die. So, so you want to catch it early by monitoring it either visually, just is it wet, right? Put your finger in, is it wet beneath there, or is it kind of reasonable? Okay. That's mostly how I assess if the water going in is handleable by the system. But assessing chameleon hydration, of course, is kind of a little different.
All right. Now, do you use the LEAP drainage trays? What do they call it? They catch pans. That's what they call them. But essentially the trays that the cages sit on. Do you use those?
So I don't use them for the LEAP enclosures, actually, but I use them for like I have some Christopher Parsons chameleons, and those, I just feel better misting them for half an hour. It's for me, maybe them a little bit, and so those are not in bioactive setups, and that LEAP drainage tray it's really nice. I use it for that purpose. But I've never had occasion to use it for the actual leap enclosure since there's no water flowing out, and I don't build it to even allow for that. So,
yeah, I've got mine are sitting on the drainage tray. I'm going to call it drainage tray. That's what I'm used to, but you can see. So I have 2 of the 22-inch wide cages sitting on top of a 44-inch wide drainage tray. What do they call it? Catch pan.
ah, yes.
We'll use the official leap words. And so I have two layers. I have a 24-inch cages on the top layer, and the bottom layer I have 36-inch cages. And so I'm experimenting with the different heights. And I'm finding that I don't need the drainage tray as long as everything is working as it should in the cage. But I have it there just for my peace of mind, because that's how I usually do cages. And so that's I use it, but I would suppose once you set it up, if you're using the substrate tray and you seal it in, you probably don't need the catch pan. So anyway, it makes me feel good to have them there, though. But if you're not using the origami substrate tray in there, then you should get the drainage tray, because the cages themselves are not watertight. So anyway, so this is a build guide, and so let's talk about what products you actually use. So we talked about hydration and soil. Let's start with the hydration. Have you tried the Leap Fogger and the Leap Mister?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
what do you think?
The fogger, I love that fogger. Apparently,
I do too.
Yeah, this what I really like about it, and maybe I've just never used something like this, but the fogger hoses, right, that come out, they bend in this wonderful way where you can perfectly adjust where they go. And they're small when you compress them, but these hoses extend multiple feet, and there's 2 of them in there if you want. So I love that thing, and the fact that you can load from the top also is a big advantage to me, because in the past, before I built some big fogging manifold system, I don't know why it was so hard to find a simple humidifier where it was easy to fill up. It was always this laborious thing where you have to take it off, dismantle the whole thing, unscrew it, fill it upside down, then plop it back onto the... I don't know why that was such a common design element. It doesn't make... Anyway, that's a tangent.
I don't know why either. I think it's because it's easier to manufacture, because you have one less part. Maybe it's cheaper.
Gotta be, right? There's some reason, I'm sure. But I just don't know what.
The thing is, all of the foggers on the market were not designed for us. They were just thrown together by somebody who said, okay, by a bunch of companies in China that said there's a market for foggers. And so none of them were actually designed with any reptile person at the helm. And so they were just saying, they were just pushed into the market, and we used them because it's the best we had available. Until that one company came up with the top loading and the 4 liters and the 2 tubes coming out, and I absolutely loved that thing. And the best news ever was when Tim Marks, he was talking with me. He said, okay, I'm doing this, and I modeled it, and I made our fogger after the one you love, Bill. And that was just the best news ever, because and yes, and now what's perfect is now we've got an American company that is in charge of this fogger. And when you buy these Chinese foggers off of Amazon, and the names keep changing as to who's offering it, and you have no idea how long they're going to offer it, or if they're going to support it, or if I literally got some of these foggers in, and the tubes didn't fit because they just threw a bunch of parts together. I mean, there's no real I won't say intelligence. There's no real passion or anything. Nobody cares. They're just selling you cheap garbage. But finally, we have the absolute best fogger model with someone who cares in charge. And so that was just the best news ever. So yeah, I have a bunch of those old foggers, but I actually bought Leap foggers, and I want to use those. Not only that, they've got a real cool gecko on it, and they're green, and so I like the way they look. But
yeah, the display is nice too. It's cute, the little gecko and everything. Anyway, I agree. I think it's just smart. Again, I could theme this whole thing with the design is smart given the application. It just makes sense. You have extendable hoses that work, and you can crimp them down so they go wherever you want over so much space. You fill from the top. It has a good capacity. It's just everything you want in a fogger, and it's about time. I mean, you can tell I'm frustrated by how bad the alternatives have been, and it's refreshing that that's no longer an issue. So
yeah, and those foggers they used to break down a lot, and so I mean, I've been running my Leap fogger for a while now. I don't know how much Tim actually changed on the inside, but at least now we've got quality control. And so we've got someone who cares, someone who's stateside, and who's going to control the quality. And so I'm very optimistic about our future in fogging in the Chameleon community. And let me tell you, as somebody, on my website, I have to recommend products to people to buy. And so I am sitting there trying to sort through all of this garbage on Amazon and figuring out what can I recommend that's not going to come back and bite me when someone says, I bought this on your recommendation and it's a piece of garbage. Finally, I can recommend something that I actually feel confident is going to make people happy. So, yeah. Thank you, Tim. And just by how much passion me and Michael have over this subject, you can tell what kind of pain we were in.
Better.
All right, so let's talk about the Leap Mister. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it works. It's good. I'd say it's my setups, right? I have a million animals, so I have the big Miss King Ultimate setup, right? So This is more designed for a few enclosures, right? Or not 100 at least.
Yeah.
So it works great for the application. Again, it has the same smart design. It works well. Mine hasn't broken or anything. It's been really good. It's just that for my application, I need so many nozzles that I already kind of have a setup, right? But there's a number of sort of cheapo misting systems on the market that are pretty much all similar, and I'm not going to name names exactly, but there's a number of them that just don't last, and they're just not great as far as the design. There's even one where you still have to the loading of water is cumbersome and all this other stuff. So as far as...
And by the way, you're welcome to name names. We're talking products here, so you can name names.
That's true. All right, maybe I should.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Name names. Let's talk about everything available.
Like the monsoon system, for instance, which you see, the Exoterra one. I like Exoterra as a company generally, but I mean, that thing, it breaks all the time, and it has the feel of just something where you put a picture of a reptile on it and say it's for reptiles as opposed to and that's so much of the industry is like that, right? Because it's not the biggest market, but it's just refreshing that that's no longer what I'm worrying about. So as far as misting systems that work for a smaller scale than some massive production, like a few enclosures or even just one, I just get the Leap one. I mean, it works well. It doesn't break. It doesn't have all the same problems that many of the other misters that fill that niche have, right?
Yeah, the ones that we've got out there, it starts, just a little recap for everybody. We've got the Reptirain, that's the Zoom Ed Reptirain, and the Exoterra Monsoon, and they've got a larger model, they've got a smaller model, and these unfortunately, they've not been designed for chameleons or for screen cage. They were both designed for the glass terrariums. You know, the Monsoon comes with the suction cups, and the Reptarane, they sell it with, they show it on the screen cage, but there's no way to get the Reptarane inside the screen cage, and the hanging it on the side is just ridiculous. It was not designed for chameleons, and they're selling it for chameleons. And what comes out of the Reptarane is not a fine mist. It's like spraying your chameleon. At least the Monsoon has a good mist coming out, and I'd say the thing with the Monsoon is it's like a cheap version of a good mister, and so it can be made to work. Although I don't like the mist nozzles because you can't adjust them. Like pretty much wherever you stick them, and you can't stick them in a lot of cages. But the cost of the Monsoon is close enough to the Mist King or Climb Mist level that it's not worth it to go cheaper. You just go to the Mist King and Climb Mist, which are the workhorses of the industry. They will drive 10 nozzles. That is a serious system, and if you've got a lot of cages, I just recommend the Mist King or Climb Mist. Don't bother with anything else. Now, the little mister from Leap, that is perfect for one cage. If you've got one cage or even two cages, it can drive two mist nozzles pretty well. And so if you've got a single cage, it's a nice contained system. It's top loading, so you just pour in water from the top, and you can see the reservoir in there, so you know when it's getting low, and it's easy to clean out. So do you use the Leap Mister with any of your systems?
Yeah,
Okay.
I use it outdoors actually, because that's a different.
Outdoors, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's kind of odd, but that's it's a different timer, right? It's a different
Yes.
loop. So what that means is I can, for more sensitive species, or not sensitive, but species that I feel more comfortable hitting with mist for longer periods of time. That's really nice because it's a separate kind of loop, and I just put it on one particular enclosure I have outside. And before that, what I did is I used it on Brachygia, where in particular I was keeping Decarii, which is kind of more, I'm not going to say desert, but the conditions they live in, it's not year round anyway, it's not always wet. So I used that because they were in one of my big rooms, but I wanted it on a separate system that I could modulate to trigger a brumation or hibernation, whatever you want to call it. So that's what I used it for, that and then the outside. So it works, right?
Okay.
But everything else is sort of hooked up to my same big timer and system, so most of it's on Mist King.
Yeah. So what he's talking about with the timer, it's the one thing I don't like about the Leap Mister, but it's one of those situations where the more complicated you make it, the more expensive it is, and how much do you really need that feature. So I'm not going to say I don't like the Leap Mister, because I'm actually using it right up there. I'm using it. But the one thing to keep in mind is that it's a cyclic timer, and these are in because they're cheaper than the seconds timers. But a cyclic timer is where you have one control that says how many times per day you're going to have a misting session, and the other control says how long of a misting session you're going to have during the day. So you have a choice between, I forget what it is, but like every 2 hours, every 4 hours, every 6 hours, every 24 hours, every 12 hours. And so, if you look at the Chameleon Academy, I have these very finely scheduled misting times. They're just for a little bit, and they're at various random places during the day. And so you can do that with seconds timers that are like on the Mist King or the Climb Mist, that you program a clock, and then you can have like 8 different on-off times, and so you have that very fine control. And I've built my hydration schedules around that control. So now I have this simpler system, which is which is kind of cute. And I'm now adjusting to how do I work this, and I'm enjoying it. It's working for me. So it's once again a growth period for good old Bill here. And if you do want a finer control over different start times during the day, you can just get one of these appliance timers and plug it into the appliance timer, and you have the mister to where it mists for 60 seconds, 120 seconds, whenever it's turned on, and then the timer, the appliance timer, just turns it on at 15 seconds. You can do it at any 15-minute interval during the day, and so you get more than enough resolution. If you want more resolution, you just use an appliance timer, and so it's really not that big of a deal to have the simpler timing, the cyclic timer. But the nice thing is, I mean, the misting is fine. It's a fine mister, and so it works really well for these cages.
That's why I use it outside and for the Bruchesia, because the actual timing on that, as you know, outside it's not really as big a deal. We don't have to worry about our floors getting ruined, for instance. So it works great for that purpose. That's part of why I use it out there. And then for the Bruchesia, they have kind of, well, I'll save that for another episode or whatever, but they don't, in my experience, they haven't required the same like fine point misting, because I hydrate through some other means. But I think there's also these Wi-Fi timers that you can connect to your phone. I think some of those actually have seconds resolution as well. So that's another option if you wanted to just get that resolution. There's a couple of the Wi-Fi timers that do that, I believe. So.
All right, so let's talk soil. I have used the Leap soil because I wanted to try it out, and I like it very much. What soil are you using?
Yeah, so I have the Leap Living Earth. That stuff is really nice, but it's done fantastically for me as far as drainage and holding humidity, and plants grow in it, which is not always the case for other substrates like the cocoa core and all this other stuff. And maybe that's obvious, but it actually, it supports plants, and it lasts a while too, which is really nice. It's part of a good bioactive substrate is having material in there that breaks down over time, right? And the Leap Living Earth does that nicely, and it sticks around for a while. So I use that in the past. Of course, I still have this in some of my enclosures. I have just basic ABG mix, and I've even made my own kind of mixes and modifications, adding sand and things like that. But whatever substrate I use, the way I do things is I always add extra stuff to it. Right, so I add sticks, and I add grass seeds, and I add pea seeds, and wood and bark and stuff. So Living Earth is great. ABG mix I've used, but the way I do things, I modify everything to have even more stuff in it for the bioactive setups.
So how do you judge as to what is a good soil or not?
I'd say, so one thing I've done in the past is I actually use, I pot a plant with it sometimes. And I'll just see, well, how is this thing doing? And it's not a pothos or something indestructible. I picked something that would tell you nothing, because they grow in just water. But a plant that's maybe a little bit more finicky, and then I just try growing a plant in it. And if the soil behaves fine for a plant, where it drains appropriately and the plant gets good aeration, then that's a good sign. But I don't always have time to test it first, so I just put it in the enclosure. And the number one thing I look for is whether the water pools on the top. I've tried to make my own substrates before, and I know failure was when there's just a big puddle of water on the top. That's bad for everything. That's like, don't keep the substrate if it's puddling water, right? So that's my first check. Then typically I'll just run the mister or whatever hydration I use as I would normally, and I just check up on the substrate over time. So I like to make sure, well, is it staying wet, or what's it draining like? But really the proof of a good substrate is long-term bioactive viability. So over time, I've done enough of it where I kind of have a system, and I just know if I do this, this, and this, it's going to work. So.
Yeah. Well, learning about soils and bioactive soils is once again another growth area for me. Apparently collecting growth areas these days, and I'm looking into it. I'm talking to people. I'm working on interviews so I can figure this out. And I look at these ingredients and I see a lot of real cool stuff, but I have no idea what they mean. So I don't know that I can offer any advice, but what I know is I've been using the Leap soils, and they have been working very well for me. And I've actually been growing a maidenhair fern, and it's been growing longer than I've ever been able to keep a maidenhair fern before. So there's 2 thumbs up. My isopods are flourishing in the soil, and so that's another thing that I like about it. And so at this point, I'm going to say I'm going to put the Leap soil on the shopping list because it's nice and convenient and it works well. And so as we go on throughout the year, we'll learn more about soils on this show. But right now, 2 thumbs up to the Leap soil. So,
Same here.
All right, so I think that is lighting systems. We got what lighting systems are you using on your Leap cage?
The Leap lighting systems. Okay. So,
right.
the fixtures. So where to begin?
Yeah, let's explain this. Once again, Tim put a lot of effort into this, and he put together the perfect system. But let's go ahead. I shouldn't say perfect. I'm not gonna lead the jury here. That's my opinion. We'll go for your opinion. You can say whatever you want.
Sure. So one thing I should have mentioned earlier about some of the benefits of the system is, you have more than one reptile, even one reptile. Most people get a baker's rack and then put all the animals on that. That's just what is done. And it's odd to me that until now, no one has acknowledged that fact that most people with multiple animals use baker's racks. So something really nice about the Leap setups or the lighting is that you can latch them onto the racks themselves. So what that does is it lets you maximize the space and also modulate how high up the lights are. So I mean that's extremely irritating when you have something just laying on the screen and then you have to worry about kind of making the heights of each rack correct so that you can get your hand under there and you pull it out and it knocks over your other light bulbs, and it's very irritating to me. So this is wonderful because it clips on in an easy to access spot. It makes perfect sense, and the quality of the fixtures are really good, as are the lights. So it's a great system for that purpose. I just like the ergonomics of it. Again, it's logical. It's what there's even been some businesses just designed to try to do that. So the fact that these lights go above the enclosure in a smart way with the rack system is, for multiple enclosures, it's the way to go.
Yeah, I got to tell you, from 2 perspectives, I really like this light system. First of all, I started Dragon Strand in 2013 with the idea of cages, the Chameleon cages on racks, and putting lights on the cages has always been a challenge. And so I've been working on this for a while. It hasn't been my prime focus, but it got to the point where I would I put a shelf above the cage, and then the bottom of the next row there would be a shelf, and so I would make a 6-inch space between the cages where the lights could go. Tim came at it from a different perspective, which I really like, to where he's got these clips that attach to the bottom of the shelf on top, and the lights just clip onto the clips. And so that just saves a whole lot of space. And so I got respect from a fellow manufacturer where he solved a real problem with a very nice solution, but also as an educator. from the Chameleon Academy. One of the biggest problems, not biggest problem, okay, a big problem has been being able to give UVB advice as to how to set up the cage when if you have a different bulb and a different fixture, they aren't necessarily, if you use a different fixture than I do, you're not going to necessarily get the same results. And so it's just wonderful for me to have one manufacturer that sells a bulb and fixture together. And that's why I love the Arcadia Pro T5, because it was together and I don't have somebody grabbing a bulb from somewhere and a fixture somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Well, Tim did that. And so now we've got this light and fixture that's meant to work together. And so I'm going to be able to, I'm evaluating it now. I love it. And I love having that option to share with people. And so it's an advantage. Someone's going to bring up, yeah, but ZoomEd does that as well. Yeah, kinda. They kinda do that. It's not always sold together, and I really don't like the quality of that fixture. So I kind of just consider that it really hasn't been done. And so I really like what Tim's been able to do, because you go to the Leap website and you buy a UVB bulb and you buy a UVB fixture, there's no way you're going to mess it up, because there's only one choice between light and fixture. It's not T5, T8, and all these different fixtures that you got to mix and match. No, there's one fixture and there's one light. And so that makes my job as an educator so much simpler. I can just give one link and say, go do this, and there's no way for them to mess it up. So I really like the system. Now, let's talk about the light, the LED light bar. That's set up just like the UVB, and it clips on just like the UVB. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so, as time has gone on, I think people have started to understand, or at least think, right, that the ambient lighting is just as important of a parameter as, we'll even say UV, or maybe even like hydration. I mean, basic stuff. The light is critically important. So basically any opportunity I see to increase light in the enclosure, ambient light that is, I think that should be done, right? There's actually lots of stuff that we talk about in the community or reptiles or just in life in general. It's not really based on science, right? Some of it is, but a lot of it is based on, well, I saw this, right? It's kind of anecdotal, and that's fine, right? But increasing the lighting has some solid science behind it, and for that reason, I appreciate doing it. So I think it's a great addition. In the past, I've used primarily dual fixture bulbs, right, that have a 6500K light for daylight and then UV. But adding an LED bar, I think that's the way to go if you can. So I think it's a great addition.
Yeah, I like it because especially when you're using a rack, it's an 18-inch rack, and so space is at a premium. And this is why I very appreciative of LED technology becoming more and more available, because it's not as hard to fit everything you need to above the cage. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems that we have about putting lights directly on top of the cage is that these T5 fixtures and LED bars produce heat. And so you are heating up your cage with these. And for most of my enclosures, I don't have to put on a basking bulb. Okay, my Panthers, they'll get a little bit of a basking, but they really don't need it with the amount of heat that comes off of these lights. And so there's an advantage of, number one, only having one LED bar and then one UVB, and that's sufficient. But also when you're attaching these things to the shelf above it, it gives you that an inch or two, however much space you want, of a space between the light and the top of the cage. And so that gives an opportunity for that heat to dissipate, and it's not all going into your cage. Mm-hmm. And well, we should have mentioned also for the UVB, it allows you to make a very convenient space above the cage, so you're not putting that very high UVB directly into the cage, so you get that that 2 inches for your 5.0. The 2 inches is perfect to just dissipate all of the ultra high UVB. So what goes into your cage is safe levels of UVB. So this being able to hook it up to the bottom of the shelf above it is convenient and functional in so many ways, and it solves a lot of nagging problems that we have had. So I'm appreciative of the light system.
It's also just, it simply works well, and it puts out a lot of high quality, nice spectrum light. It's this beautiful kind of white light that, it's great for plants. It just makes the enclosure look better. I mean, if you can put it in there, I think that's really worth doing.
Yeah, and he has this nice interconnect cable, so you only have to plug in one of them, and then you can connect the other one to the light. So you can connect the UVB to the light, which is plugged into the wall, so you don't need two plugs. So that's kind of nice. So we've got the light system, and now I will say they've only got 12-inch and 36-inch lengths, and then the 48-inch. So it works well on the rack. If you're thinking about getting an individual cage, especially like the 22-inch wide, you're gonna have to get the 12-inch light system, and so you're not gonna get the system that goes all the way across the cage if you're not gonna have it in the rack. Because if you jump up to the 36-inch wide, then you've got what is it, that 14 inches on either side, or 14 inches, so 7 inches on either side. I guess if you did it diagonal, you wouldn't have that much overhang, but just know that if you're going to going to have your cage standing alone, that you'll have to get the 12-inch light system. These cages really are optimized for being on the rack, and that's the way a lot of us are going to use them. They're just a design characteristic.
Sure.
Any other words before we leave the lighting situation?
Well, I just want to draw attention to one of the points you made about the heat that comes out of fixtures. So I mean, that can be used to your advantage or your detriment, right? Because as you say, in many cases, that extra heat can allow for no need for a basking light, for instance. However, in many of the species I work with, where they're much more tolerant of cool conditions than hot, and that's the case for many chameleons, it is to our advantage, or my advantage, I should say, in decoupling light from heat, because heat has the potential to kill pretty quickly depending on the species. So that is an advantage, I'd say, is that you have the ability to decouple heat from light, which is valuable. Yeah, and definitely something to be careful of when we're talking about a 48-inch tall cage. It's a lot easier for the chameleon to find different gradients in there. So you can deal with heat a lot easier in that kind of cage. But when we're talking about an 18-inch tall cage, 24-inch, it starts to become something you really better keep an eye on. So just word of warning. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about a step-by-step. We're going to fill up this cage. We've got for this build guide, we've got our LEAP cage, whether it's a 18-inch or 24-inch. What's our first step? Once we've built it, we're ready to do the bioactive setup. What's our first step? Right. So yeah, assuming the substrate tray is in there, I think, of course, it's deciding what's going to go in there, because that's going to change some aspects of your approach. But perhaps that goes without saying. So let's just say that this is a build where we're making a typical bioactive setup for something like a carpet chameleon or babies. Does that sound good?
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing here. Let's do that.
Perfect. So I'd say I'd consider, based on previous experiences that you've had, are you going to need a drainage layer or not? Are you going to need the clay balls at the bottom? And what is your strategy to avoid flooding the enclosure? So, that of course depends on the species and so on. But decide clay balls or no clay balls, because it's obviously very hard to change that once the entire thing is set up and grown in. Unless you just toss the setup, you're kind of stuck with that decision. So if you're not sure how much you're going to miss, and you're kind of, maybe you don't have as much experience with this particular setup, I might go for the clay balls just to hedge your bets, right? Just say, well, maybe I'm going to over-mist it and it's going to get a bit flooded, so I want that extra kind of insurance, right? I prefer not using them because I find with the amount of water and misting I add, the plants simply take up the water, and actually the water becomes more available to the plants, assuming it's not waterlogging it. So I prefer doing it without the clay balls, but as insurance, might be a good idea. So that's number one, because you can't take that back once everything is set up. Then you either maybe want to add a cover over the clay balls, or if you're not using them, no need. Then I would start mixing in the substrate, the dirt, right? Now, for me, I am adding things to the substrate for each layer that I'm putting in there. So I put in some of the dirt, not all of it, some of it, add some grass seeds, add some, little leaves, some leaf litter, a little bit of sand maybe. I sort of tweak it to match what I think I'm going to need in that enclosure. So don't be afraid to mix things in with the soil, assuming you already tested it, and make sure it's not going to ruin everything. So I'll mix some springtails in, some leaf litter, maybe some little rocks or twigs and things, and seeds into the substrate. Then I'll typically put a couple structural plants, like big, kind of a Schefflera or some other, more like a little tree as opposed to skinnier stuff. Just some kind of anchor points for plants. So I'll put those in, and then of course I'll continue adding substrate and continue to mix it all up together until those plants are sort of embedded. And then at the top, I'll add some grass seeds, some pea plants, some beans, whatever seeds, right? So that things grow in over time. Based on where I think things are going to grow in, I then place the branches. So then there's branches, and you already have that slight structural support from those maybe one or two bigger plants in there, more sturdy plants. And then I'll sort of plan it out so that everything will grow in the way I'm expecting to optimize the available spots for the chameleon. So, yeah.
So with the plants, let's talk about selection of plants, because we're talking about a small area. And like whenever you say put in a Schefflera arboricola, that's a 20 to 30 foot tall tree plant. So how do you select the plants, and how do you keep them behaving?
Yeah, so there's many plants that work, right? However, over time, I've sort of started thinking about the plants a little bit more functionally in terms of what am I trying to get out of this plant? And so that's important that you ask that, I think. For instance, a pothos is great in that it doesn't ever die, right? It has big leaves, lots of cover, grows easily. But when we're talking chameleons that are an inch long or less upon hatching, or things that are really tiny, in some ways that plant is actually not useful for what many people might use it for, because the chameleon, if it's so small, it can't really use that space. A giant leaf, it's not going to go climbing on the edge of that leaf necessarily. And if the stem is 10 times as thick as the chameleon, you need to consider that. So it's not that all plants are useful for the same purposes. So it depends on how big the chameleon is and what I'm trying to get out of that plant. So with that said, Schefflera, I think, is commonly used because the stems are pretty small, which is nice. The leaves are numerous, so it offers cover, and it grows well. Those are all really good. I sometimes pick kind of low ground cover, like creeping ficus, for instance, where it has really tiny leaves, really tiny stems, depending on what I'm using it for. So I pick plants that are hardy, but I think about what am I missing in this enclosure? Are my sticks too big? All right, are they too small? What in terms of perching and cover and protection from light and water collecting surfaces do I want to get out of it, right? So I know that was kind of a lot, and it wasn't maybe that clear of an answer, but I think that just demonstrates that there's a lot to think about when you pick your plant. It's not as simple as...
It's par for the course, Michael. You're on the Chameleon Academy podcast. It's what we do.
Excellent. Happy to add to that then.
Do you have problems with when the plants grow, shading the plants underneath them?
Yes, so I plan for that because I pick more shade tolerant plants for the understory if I can. But how much to give away here? So I should mention that I've been experimenting with actually allowing some of the plants to cover light in a portion of the enclosure. For instance, for the tiny Kaluma species like Rooloco, Lanatum, Bokurai, all the others, I find that they actually utilize that shade, and that heavy shade in particular. So I've been kind of playing around with it, and I find that actually blocking some of the light, if done strategically, can add a new set of microclimates where there's no light from the top down. It's a darker area. So just real quick, I know it's excessive maybe, but there's this great paper that came out where they studied the UV levels that 2 species of chameleons in Madagascar exposed themselves to over the course of 4 months. It was Kaluma nazutum, I believe, and Kaluma brevicorn. And these are, you see them come in on import, and the average UV level they were exposed to over the course of those 4 months, it was between 0.2 and 0.4. It was almost nothing. It was so minimal. And they found that they spent most of their day in the shade. So I've tried to implement those findings and offering a shaded region, and it's been very successful. Now, to actually answer your question and not just pontificate, what I do, I simply cut them when I'm worried that a chameleon might be able to access the screen from the top, right? That's my kind of general approach. Yeah. I just said that I let it grow sometimes, but typically day to day, I cut it when it allows access to a region of the enclosure that is not going to help. And what I do is I either just take that cutting and put it right back in the ground and hope that it will sprout and make a new plant, or I just cut it and leave it and it gets eaten by the cleanup crew. So I kind of keep it in the system, right? Okay. But I just trim it, scissors, keep it in there as soon as it gets so high that it's blocking some aspect that I wanted it there for originally.
Now, do you let the system settle, or how do you get the system, once you set it up, how do you get it ready for the chameleon to be introduced?
One thing I should have mentioned in the build, steps is, of course, the cleanup crew, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I should have said that, but basically at the end of it and throughout, I'm adding springtails, or depending on what I'm putting in there, maybe isopods. I've kind of grown apart from isopods lately due to some incidents, but mostly springtails, or little other beneficial fungi and things like that. So that's key for the system. I add them throughout the dirt, but also on the top in a heavy layer. So as far as what do I do to get the system ready, sometimes if I plan it correctly, it's effectively usable right away. Ideally, you want to let it sit so everything settles in, right? So maybe a couple weeks, because by then there'll be plenty of grass and pea plants sprouting and things will be more settled in, and you'll get a better feel of the hydration and the misting and all that stuff. But if you need an enclosure right away, I've not found it entirely necessary to wait that time if it's kind of an emergency. Like a new import came in, I just need some enclosure. You can set it up and it's not going to kill it. But ideally, you wait a couple weeks just for things to grow in, for the system to kind of stabilize.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is a build guide that anybody can follow and enjoy. So how's it going? Just overall open-ended question. How is it going with your bioactive systems now?
I think awesome. Bioactive to me is as beneficial for my enjoyment as it is the chameleons. It's just fun, and chameleons in many ways are sort of our view and window into a beautiful natural world that I think we often get disconnected from. And in bioactive setups, it encourages more of that kind of exploration and admiration of that world. So, over time, I've been kind of thinking about lighting more, and what are the microbiomes like in the dirt, and what are the fungal elements of it. And it's when you are tasked with creating a natural, sustaining ecosystem in your house, I think it just invites all sorts of enjoyable thoughts and endeavors. Yeah. So I love it. I think it's great. I've been trying to expand it and apply it to different things and modulate this and that, and it's never ending, right? That's what's fun.
Yeah. You're creating an entire environment, and you learn so much, and it has added a new dimension to the chameleon keeping hobby for me, and I'm loving it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same here.
All right. Well, I think we can let everybody go here and go off and create environments and create life there. Michael, I want to thank you so very much for coming on and sharing all of this. And I have a website page, a web page that will show Michael's build and be a visual companion to this episode. So, Michael, I'll say thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me as always. Look forward to next time.